New York is already loud, already filthy, already exhausted. But tonight, it feels wrong. Sirens tear through the dark, police lights smear across wet pavement, and armored men move through the streets like they own every shadow in the city. The Foot Clan. Nobody says their name too loudly anymore. People just lock their doors, keep their heads down, and pray they don't get caught in the middle. Somewhere above that fear, April O'Neil is chasing a story everyone else is too scared to touch, clutching a camera, pushing through barricades, knowing one bad step could end her career before it even begins. She's been told 100 times to stop digging. Her boss thinks she's desperate. Her cameraman, Vern, thinks she's reckless in that polished, pretty boy way of his, always joking when he's nervous. But April sees what nobody wants to admit. This city isn't just crime-ridden, it's cornered. People are disappearing. Docs are being hit. Witnesses change their stories halfway through an interview because fear crawls into their throat and squeezes. And every time she gets close to something real, somebody shuts the door in her face. Still, she keeps going. Because under all that ambition, under the frustration and the forced confidence, she actually cares. That's the dangerous part. One rainy night, that need for the truth drags her down to the harbor, where a shipment is about to be hijacked. She hides behind stacked containers, camera trembling in her hands, heart punching against her ribs so hard she can hear it over the storm. Men in black flood the dock with military precision, faces hidden, weapons ready. Workers hit the ground. Nobody fights back. Nobody even screams at first. That silence is worse. It's the silence of people who know exactly what happens next. April keeps filming anyway. She should run. She knows it. This is a mistake. She stays. Then the night changes. A chain whips through the air. A man slams into steel. Another is yanked backward into darkness so fast it looks unreal. Shapes move across the containers, too quick, too heavy, too controlled to be human. One thug falls. Then another. The foot soldiers panic, spinning, firing into empty space, and suddenly the whole dock becomes chaos. Metal clangs. Water sprays. A body crashes through wood. April's breath catches as she tries to focus her lens on whatever is happening out there, but every time lightning flashes, she sees only pieces. A massive silhouette, a masked face, something green, something impossible. And just like that, it's over. The attackers are down. The shipment is untouched. The storm keeps falling like none of it mattered. April stares through the rain at a symbol painted in the dark on a container wall. It isn't random. It means something. A message, a warning, or maybe a promise. By the time police sirens swell in the distance, whoever saved that dock is gone. Vanished. All April has left is shaky footage, a soaked jacket, and the awful feeling that she just saw the beginning of something huge. Something the city is not ready for. The problem is, nobody believes her. Back at the station, her story sounds insane even to people paid to chase insanity for ratings. Vigilantes in the shadows? Giant figures leaping across rooftops? A secret force fighting the Foot Clan while the police look helpless? Her boss doesn't hear bravery in her voice. He hears career suicide. He wants fluff, not danger. Smiles, not truth. Human interest junk people can watch over breakfast and forget by lunch. April pushes back, but the room turns cold. That footage, the one thing she thought would finally prove she belonged here, becomes another reason for everyone to look at her like she's unstable. So she goes home carrying the wreckage of another failed shot, and that's when the story hits somewhere deeper than pride. Her father, a man worn down by disappointment and time, still looks at her like she can become something better than the city. That hurts more than her boss ever could, because April wants to be brave, wants to be respected, wants to matter. But underneath all of it, there's an old ache she never really outran, a childhood filled with fragments, lab memories, names she barely remembers, a sense that something from her past was taken from her before she was old enough to understand it. And now, with this strange new mystery pulling at her, those buried pieces begin to stir. The city keeps spiraling, crime spreads, fear thickens, and April can't let go of what she saw at the docks. So she starts following rumors, tracing whispers through subway tunnels and back alleys, chasing a ghost no one else thinks exists. That obsession leads her underground, deeper into the bones of New York, where the noise of the city above fades into dripping pipes and flickering lights. She hears movement first, then breathing. Not one set of footsteps, several, heavy, measured, close. Her flashlight shakes as she turns toward the darkness, and every survival instinct in her body screams at her to run. She doesn't. A figure steps forward. Tall, broad, green skin gleaming under the dirty light, a shell, a mask over the eyes. Then another shape behind him, and another. Not monsters exactly, not men either. Something in between, something that should not exist. April freezes, staring at the impossible while the impossible stares back at her. And in that single suspended second, one thought crashes through her mind harder than fear. She knows them, or somehow they know her. April's breath stops, completely. The tunnel feels smaller now, tighter, like the walls themselves are closing in as those massive figures step closer into the flickering light. Water drips somewhere behind her. Slow. Echoing. One drop at a time. Her fingers tighten around the flashlight until her knuckles ache, but she doesn't move. Can't move. Because whatever stands in front of her isn't attacking, isn't rushing, it's watching, studying, and that somehow feels even worse. The tallest one tilts his head slightly, blue mask cutting across his eyes, sharp and focused. A leader. You can feel it in the way the others stay half a step behind him. Another, with a red mask, paces like a coiled spring, fists tightening, jaw set like he's seconds away from snapping. The third spins something in his hand, a staff, calm but alert, eyes flicking between April and the shadows. And the last one steps forward just enough for the light to catch his face. Orange mask, curious, almost friendly. It doesn't make sense. None of this makes sense. April swallows, throat dry. I saw you, she manages, voice barely steady. The words sound ridiculous the second they leave her mouth. Of course she saw them. They're standing right there. But she means the docks, the fight, the impossible strength. The silence stretches. No answer. Just the hum of the underground and the weight of their presence pressing down on her chest. Then the one in blue speaks. Calm. Controlled. You shouldn't be here. Not a threat, not exactly. But it lands heavy, final. And that's when something shifts inside her. Fear doesn't disappear. It sharpens, twists into something else. Determination. People are getting hurt out there, she fires back, surprising even herself. The Foot Clan is taking over this city and nobody's doing anything about it. Except you. Her voice cracks on that last word. Because she doesn't know what they are. Heroes? Vigilantes? Something worse? The one in red steps forward fast. Too fast. We handle it, he snaps, voice rough, anger simmering just under the surface. You stay out of it. His presence hits like a wall, raw and dangerous. April instinctively takes a step back, heart racing again. This was a mistake, a huge mistake. But then, Raph. The blue-masked leader doesn't raise his voice. He doesn't need to. The command is quiet, but it cuts through everything. The red one, Raph, stops. Breath heavy, muscles still tense. But he listens. That tells April everything she needs to know about who's really in charge here. The leader looks back at her, eyes narrowing slightly, studying her face. And for a second, something flickers there. Recognition. It's gone almost instantly, replaced by guarded calm, but April sees it, feels it, and suddenly, her pulse spikes for a completely different reason. Wait, she says, stepping forward despite herself. You know me. Silence. The air thickens. Even the one with the staff stops spinning it. The orange-masked one glances between them, confusion creeping into his expression. Leo? He mutters under his breath, but it's enough. Leo. That's his name. Leo. That's his name. April locks onto it like a lifeline. The leader, Leo, doesn't answer right away. And that hesitation says more than any words could. That's when everything breaks. A distant rumble echoes through the tunnel. Not thunder, not trains. Something heavier, mechanical. The ground vibrates under their feet, subtle at first, then stronger. Dust shakes loose from the ceiling. April turns toward the sound, confusion flashing across her face. Boom. The wall at the far end of the tunnel explodes inward. Concrete shatters. Smoke floods the space. Figures pour through the breach in perfect formation. Foot Clan soldiers, armed, masked, relentless. They move like they've been waiting for this exact moment. Like this wasn't random. Like they were tracking something. Or someone. April's stomach drops. They followed me. The thought hits like ice water. Leo's expression hardens instantly. Get behind us. Now. No hesitation, no doubt, just action. Everything erupts into motion. Raph charges first, a blur of raw wom points smashing into the front line, sending two soldiers crashing back before they even raise their weapons. Metal clashes. Shouts echo. The one with the staff. Donnie moves with precision, striking fast, disarming opponents before they can react. The orange one, Mikey spins into the chaos with surprising agility, turning the fight into something almost fluid. Controlled madness. And Leo, he moves like silence itself. Clean. Efficient. Every strike calculated. April stumbles back, pressed against the cold tunnel wall, watching something unreal unfold inches from her face. This isn't just fighting. It's choreography. Years of training. Brotherhood. Every move connected. Every breath in sync. But there are too many. More soldiers flood in, weapons raised. The tunnel fills with smoke, noise, and the sharp metallic scent of blood and gunfire. A shot rings out. Sparks explode off the wall near April's head. She flinches hard, dropping to the ground, ears ringing. This is real. This is happening. And she's right in the middle of it. Then she sees it. A symbol on one of the soldiers' uniforms. Different, higher rank. And behind them, a figure steps through the smoke. Tall, still, watching, not fighting, commanding, commanding, commanding. Even the chaos seems to bend around him. April's breath catches as fear crawls up her spine again, colder this time, heavier, because whatever just walked into that tunnel isn't just another soldier. This is something else, something worse. And the turtles, every single one of them, just felt it too. The tunnel goes quiet for half a second. Not silence, never silence, but something heavier. Like the fight itself just hesitated. Even Raph stops mid-swing, chest heaving, eyes locking onto that figure stepping through the smoke. Tall, controlled, wrapped in darkness like it belongs to him. The foot soldiers shift instantly, forming a line without a word. Not fear, respect. That's worse. April feels it in her bones. This is the one they answer to. The man doesn't rush, doesn't shout. He just walks forward, slow, deliberate, every step echoing against the cracked concrete like a countdown. His face is hidden, but his presence? Crushing. You don't need to see his eyes to know they're locked on the turtles. Measuring, judging, waiting. Leave, Leo says, low, sharp, without looking back at April. It's not a suggestion this time. She doesn't argue, but she doesn't run either. Because something about this moment, this collision of shadows and secrets, feels bigger than fear. The man finally stops. Just a few steps beyond the broken wall. The smoke curls around him, parting like it knows better than to touch. When he speaks, his voice is calm, cold, controlled in a way that makes every word land heavier. You've been busy. Not loud, not angry. Certain. Raph growls under his breath, stepping forward. Yeah? You want to turn? Leo's arm shoots out, stopping him instantly. Not even looking. Total control. But Raph's shaking with it, rage barely contained. The kind that doesn't think. The kind that gets you killed. The man tilts his head slightly, almost amused. Undisciplined, he murmurs. Then his attention shifts to April. And everything inside her drops. You brought an outsider into this. It's not a question. It's a verdict. April feels exposed. Like every secret she's ever had just got dragged into the light. Her mind races. How does he know? Who is he? But none of it matters because the way he's looking at her, it's not curiosity, it's calculation. Leo steps forward, just enough to block that line of sight. Protective. Instant. She's not part of this. The man studies him. A pause stretches. Then, everything is part of this. And with that, he moves. Fast. Too fast. 1 second he's standing still, the next he's in front of Leo, steel flashing in his hand. The clash is instant katana meeting blade, sparks bursting in the dark. The impact echoes like thunder in the confined space. Leo slides back a step, feet grinding against wet concrete, absorbing the force. This isn't like the others. This is different. Raph lunges in with a roar, swinging hard, but the man pivots effortlessly, redirecting the Prius, sending Raph crashing into a pillar. Donnie jumps in, staff cracking forward with precision, but it's blocked, easily, like he already knew where it would land. Mikey tries to flank him, fast, unpredictable, but the man spins, disarming him in one fluid motion, weapon clattering across the floor. April can't breathe. This isn't a fight, it's domination. Leo recovers, attacking again, sharper now, faster, pushing harder with every strike. For a moment, just a moment, it looks even, steel ringing, movement blurring, leader against leader, then leader against leader, then Leo misses. Just slightly, but it's enough. The man's blade stops an inch from Leo's throat. Everything freezes. Water drips. Slow. Loud. Leo doesn't move, doesn't flinch. The man leans in just enough, voice dropping to something almost personal. "You're not ready." A whisper. But it hits like a verdict carved in stone. Then he pulls back, not to retreat, to end it. Foot soldiers surge forward again, flooding the tunnel with overwhelming force. This time, it's not about testing, it's about crushing. Leo snaps back into motion instantly. "We're leaving," he shouts. No argument, no hesitation. Donnie grabs Mikey, hauling him up. Raph shakes off the Suja, fury burning in his eyes but following anyway. Leo moves to April, gripping her arm tight, not rough, but urgent. Move, they run. Through side tunnels, over pipes, into darkness that twists and narrows with every turn. Behind them, the sound of pursuit echoes. Boots, shouts, metal scraping against concrete. Too close. Always too close. April stumbles, nearly falling, but Leo doesn't let go. Her lungs burn. Her legs scream. The city above feels a million miles away. Finally, they stop. A hidden passage. Sealed. Safe. For now. April collapses against the wall, gasping, heart trying to tear its way out of her chest. The turtles stand around her, breathing heavy, bodies tense, eyes still locked on the path they just came from. Nobody speaks. Because they all know the same thing now. That wasn't just a warning. That was a message. And whoever that man is, he's been watching them. Waiting. And, next time, he won't hold back. They don't speak for a long time. The air inside the hidden lair is thick, humid, metallic, carrying the faint by-tie of old water and something ancient. April's breathing slowly steadies, but her mind doesn't. It replays everything. The speed, the precision, that voice. "You are not ready." It echoes, over and over, like it wasn't just meant for Leo, like it was meant for all of them. Raph is the first to break. A punch slams into the concrete wall, hard, cracks spiderweb outward. "We should have finished him," he snaps, pacing like a caged animal, chest rising and falling too fast. "We had him right there." "No," Leo cuts in, calm but firm, though the tension in his voice betrays him. "We didn't. That lands. Heavy." Raph turns, eyes burning. "You hesitated." Silence. Not denial, not agreement, just truth hanging in the air where nobody wants to touch it. April watches them, something shifting inside her. These aren't just fighters, they're brothers. And right now, they're breaking at the edges. Donnie steps forward, adjusting his glasses, voice quieter but sharp with thought. "That wasn't random. He knew exactly how we fight. Every move we made, he countered it before we even finished it." He glances toward Leo. "That means we've been exposed, observed, studied." Mikey exhales slowly, trying to lighten the weight but failing. "Yeah, and not in a fun fan club kind of way." Nobody laughs. April swallows, pushing herself up from the wall. Her legs still feel weak, but something stronger is pushing her forward now. Who was he? 4 sets of eyes shift to her. This time, they don't feel like strangers. Leo answers. Quiet, controlled, Shredder. The name hits different. Like it carries weight the city hasn't even begun to understand. April shakes her head slightly. "No, that's not just a name. That's..." She struggles for the words, trying to explain the feeling crawling under her skin. "That's someone who's been planning this. For a long time." Donnie nods. He's the head of the Foot Clan. Everything happening in this city, it leads back to him. And suddenly, everything April's been chasing clicks into place. The disappearances, the silence, the fear. This isn't chaos, it's control. Raph scoffs, but there's something uneasy under it now. "Good. Then we know where to hit." "Wrong," Leo snaps, sharper this time. "You saw what he did to us." Raph steps forward again, but this time it's not just anger, it's something deeper. Frustration, powerlessness. "So what? We just hide? Wait until he decides to finish the job?" Leo doesn't answer immediately, because he doesn't have one, and that's when April steps into the middle of it. "You don't wait," she says. They all look at her. Even Raph pauses. Her voice shakes at first, but it steadies as she keeps going. "You expose him." Now there's confusion, resistance, but also curiosity. She takes a breath. You fight in the shadows. He controls them. That's his advantage. But the second people see what's really happening, what he's doing to this city, he loses that control. Her eyes lock onto Leo. You don't beat him by hitting harder. You beat him by dragging him into the light. Silence again. But different this time. Thinking. Donnie's the first to react. "Information warfare," he murmurs, almost to himself. "If we disrupt his operations publicly, force exposure, we make him react," Leo finishes. And just like that, a new plan begins to form. Raph exhales, still tense, but less explosive now. So we bait him out. Mikey nods slowly. I like bait. Bait sounds good. April feels something shift in the room. Not victory, not yet. Hope. Small, fragile, but real. Then Leo turns back to her, studying her in a way that feels different now, less guarded, more searching. You said something back there, he says slowly. About us knowing you. April's chest tightens. Yeah, that. Fragments flicker in her mind again. A lab. Bright lights. Voices she can't fully remember. The feeling of being small, safe, and something else, connected. I don't know, she admits, quieter now. But when I saw you, it didn't feel like the first time. The room goes still. Donnie and Mikey exchange a glance. Raph frowns. But Leo doesn't look surprised. He looks like something just confirmed a fear he's been carrying for a long time. And that's when he says it. There's something you need to see. April's pulse spikes again. Because the way he says it, this isn't just about the city anymore. This is about her past, about something that was never supposed to come back. And whatever it is, it's waiting. The tunnel feels different now, not just safer, deeper. Like every step April takes is pulling her further away from the world she understands and closer to something buried, something forgotten. The turtles move ahead of her, quieter this time, their energy shifted. No jokes, no arguments, just purpose. Even Raph stays silent, though his fists still clench like he's holding back a storm. They stop at a heavy metal door. Old. Reinforced. Hidden. Leo steps forward, placing his hand against a panel beside it. A soft click echoes. Then a low coin drawn as the door slides open, revealing a room bathed in dim, sterile light. Not like the tunnels. Cleaner, controlled, a lab. April freezes at the threshold. Something hits her instantly. Not sight, not sound. Memory. Her breath shortens. No, she whispers, barely audible. She doesn't know why she said it, but her body does. She steps inside slowly, eyes scanning the room glass containers, old equipment, faded screens flickering with dying light. Dust coats everything, like this place hasn't been touched in years. But it's not abandoned, it's preserved, like someone didn't want it forgotten. Donnie moves toward a console, brushing away grime, activating what little power still lingers. Screens blink. Data flickers. Fragments of files begin to load, corrupted but alive. This place, he mutters, almost in awe, it's connected to us. April turns sharply. What do you mean, us's? Leo doesn't answer right away. He walks past her, deeper into the room, stopping in front of a large glass chamber. Cracked, empty. This is where we were created. The words land like a yaka to her chest. April stares at him. That's not possible. But even as she says it, something inside her rejects the denial. Donnie pulls up a file. Grainy footage flickers onto the screen. Security logs. A laboratory. Scientists moving quickly. Urgently. And then? A man. April's heart stops. Her father. Younger. Focused. Speaking to someone off camera. The audio is distorted, but his face, there's no mistaking it. He was here, she breathes. Leo nods slowly. He helped create the mutagen. The substance that changed us. April steps closer to the screen, eyes locked, searching for answers in a past she never fully understood. No, he never told me any of this. Because it wasn't safe, Donnie says quietly. Whatever they were working on, it wasn't just science, it was power. The footage glitches, then shifts. Alarms, red lights flashing, scientists shouting, and then a figure entering the lab. Even distorted, even broken by time. April recognizes him. Shredder. The room goes cold. On the screen, chaos erupts. Equipment destroyed. People running. The experiment collapsing into violence. And in the middle of it all, 4 small shapes in a container. Turtles. April's breath catches again as another image flashes. A young girl. Watching. Her. The memory hits like a flood. Bright lights. Fear. Confusion. Her father pulling her back, telling her to stay quiet, to hide, to forget. I was there, she whispers, voice trembling. Everything starts connecting, too fast, too heavy. Leo turns to her, and now there's no doubt left in his eyes. You saved us. April looks at him, stunned. What? Donnie pulls up another clip, security override logs. Access granted. By her. A child's clearance. The cage unlocking. The turtles escaping before everything went dark. You opened the container, Donnie says. You let us out. April stumbles back slightly, shaking her head. I don't remember that. Trauma does that, Leo says softly. It hides things, buries them. Silence fills the room again, but this time, it's not confusion, it's revelation. April looks at them differently now. Not strangers, not mysteries. Something else, something connected. And suddenly, this fight against Shredder, it's not just theirs, it's hers too. Because whatever happened in this lab, it didn't end that night. It started something. Something Shredder is still chasing. Something worth destroying a city for. April lifts her gaze, determination cutting through the shock. Then we stop him, she says. Simple, but heavy with everything it carries. Leo nods once. Agreement, decision, war. And somewhere far above them the city keeps moving, unaware of the truth buried beneath its streets. Unaware that the past is about to collide with the present. And when it does, nothing will be the same. The city doesn't sleep that night. Sirens cut through every block. News spreads fast, faster than control. Reports of armored trucks hijacked, entire facilities wiped clean, witnesses describing shadows moving too fast to follow. And right in the middle of it all, one name starts surfacing again and again. Shredder. Down in the lair, the tension is different now, sharper, focused. This isn't confusion anymore, it's war moving into its final phase. Donnie works non-stop, screens glowing, tracking patterns, mapping Foot Clan movements across the city like a disease spreading through veins. Every route leads somewhere. One place. A central hub. He's consolidating, Donnie says, voice tight. Whatever he's planning, it's happening soon. Raph cracks his knuckles, pacing again, but this time, there's purpose behind it. Good. Then we hit him before he's ready. Leo shakes his head immediately. No, that's exactly what he wants. April steps closer, eyes locked on the map. He's not just building power, she says slowly. He's preparing to use it. Whatever he started back in that lab, he's finishing it now. Silence. Because they all know what that means. The mutagen. Donnie zooms in on the location. An industrial tower at the edge of the city. Isolated. Heavily guarded. This is it, he says. If he deploys it on a large scale, he won't just control the city, Leo finishes. He'll own it. The weight of that settles hard. Mikey exhales, trying to process it. So, worst case scenario, giant army of mutated monsters? Donnie doesn't smile. Worst case, controlled. That's worse. April feels it then. The fear creeping back in. But it doesn't paralyze her this time. It fuels her. Then, we don't let it happen. Leo looks at her. Really looks this time. Not as an outsider, not as a question, as part of this. We won't, he says. And just like that, the plan locks in. Fast. Precise. They move at night. Across rooftops, through shadows, the city stretching beneath them like something alive and unaware of what's about to happen. April rides with them this time. Literally and figuratively. Held steady as they move faster than anything she's ever experienced. Wind tearing past, heart racing. Fear and adrenaline mixing into something almost unreal. They reach the tower. It looms above everything, cold and silent, lights cutting through the dark like eyes watching the city below. Foot Clan guards patrol every level, armed, ready, waiting. Leo signals. They split. And then, impact. Raph crashes through the first line like a wrecking force, drawing attention instantly. Loud, brutal, exactly as planned. Donnie disables systems from the inside, plunging sections of the building into darkness. Mikey moves fast, unpredictable, taking out guards before they even realize he's there. And Leo. Leo takes April straight to the top, where it all ends, or begins. They burst through the final chamber, stepping into a massive chamber filled with machinery, tanks of glowing mutagen pulsing with an eerie light. The air hums with energy, thick, almost suffocating. And, at the center, Shredder, waiting. Of course he is. He doesn't turn right away. Doesn't need to. Right on time, he says calmly. Leo steps forward, blades ready. It ends tonight. Shredder finally faces them. And for the first time, there's no distance, no shadows hiding him, just power. Controlled. Absolute. You still don't understand, he says, almost disappointed. This city doesn't need saving. His gaze shifts to April. It needs transformation. Before Leo can react, Shredder moves. Faster than before. Stronger. The room explodes into motion as the final fight begins. Steel clashing, energy surging, everything building toward a single, unstoppable collision. And this time, there's no running. Everything collides at once. Steel screams against steel. Sparks burst like fireflies in the dark as Leo pushes forward. Every strike, sharper, faster, fueled by something deeper than discipline now. Purpose. Shredder doesn't retreat, he absorbs it, redirects it, every movement precise, like he's already seen this fight play out 100 times. Raph crashes in from the side, rage unleashed, fists slamming with raw power. But Shredder turns, blocks, and throws him back like he weighs nothing. Donnie tries to disrupt the machinery, sparks flying as systems overload, but foot soldiers flood in again, forcing him to split focus. Mikey moves like chaos, fast and unpredictable, buying seconds they desperately need. But seconds aren't enough. April sees it. The mutagen tanks, glowing brighter now, unstable. This isn't just a weapon, it's a trigger. And Shredder is stalling them. He's activating it, she shouts. Leo reacts instantly, changes direction. Not toward Shredder, toward the control system. That's when Shredder smiles. A trap. He intercepts Leo mid-move, Mygan landing hard, sending him crashing across the floor. The room shakes as energy spikes through the system. Lights flicker violently. The countdown has started. Everything speeds up. Raph roars, charging again, this time not holding back anything. Pure force. Pure sheer ones, but Shredder doesn't break. Shredder doesn't break. Doesn't slow. He adapts. Always adapting. Donnie finally reaches the system, fingers flying across controls, trying to override it. I can't shut it down, he shouts. It's locked into a release cycle. How long? Leo demands, pulling himself up, Nio at the edge of his mouth. Minutes. Too fast. Way too fast. April's mind races, not panic. Focus. She looks at the system, the flow lines, the pressure build, and then it clicks. Donnie, she shouts. Donnie, she shouts. Don't stop it. Reverse it. Send it back into the system. He freezes for half a second, then understands. That'll overload everything. Exactly. No more time. He does it. The system shifts. Energy spikes in the opposite direction. The tanks begin to pulse violently, cracks forming across the glass. The entire tower starts to tremble. Shredder turns. For the first time. Concern. For the first time. Concern. You would destroy it? He says, voice sharpening. April steps forward, fear gone, replaced by something stronger. I'd rather destroy it than let you control it. That's the moment, the shift. Shredder moves toward her. Leo intercepts. Hard. Everything he has. Every strike carries weight now. Not just skill, not just training. Choice. This ends here. Raph joins him. Then Mikey. Then Donnie, abandoning the system as it spirals into overload. 4 against 1. Not scattered. United. The difference is immediate. Shredder fights back, still powerful, still terrifying, but now he's reacting, adjusting, losing ground inch by inch. The room shakes harder, cracks spread, the mutagen tanks begin to rupture. Time is gone. Leo sees it, makes the call. Leo sees it, makes the call. Everyone out. No hesitation this time. They move, fast. April runs with them, lungs burning, heart pounding as the tower begins to collapse from within. Explosions ripple upward, tearing through steel and concrete. Behind them, Shredder stands in the chaos, still, unmoving, watching. And then, everything erupts. The explosion tears through the tower, sending fire and debris into the night sky. The shockwave blasts across the rooftops as the turtles and April dive clear, hitting the ground hard, rolling, breath ripped from their lungs. Silence follows. Heavy, ringing. April slowly lifts her head, ears buzzing, vision blurred. The tower is gone. Smoke rising, fire crackling where something terrible almost happened. She looks at them, at all of them, alive. Leo exhales slowly, shoulders finally lowering. Raph sits up, wincing but grinning through it. Mikey lets out a shaky laugh. Donnie stares back at the destruction, already processing what it means. It's over, but not completely. Because as the smoke shifts, something moves inside it. A shadow, unbroken, watching. April sees it. And this time, she doesn't feel fear, she feels understanding. This wasn't the end, just the beginning. The city will rebuild, the fight will continue. And the line between shadows and light? It's gone now, because heroes don't always come from where people expect. Sometimes, they rise from the darkness. Jonathan Liebesman was not the obvious choice to relaunch Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. Before this film, his reputation came from hard-charging, effects-heavy genre work like Battle Los Angeles and Wrath of the Titans, movies built on motion, noise, and scale rather than nostalgia. Paramount brought him aboard in early 2012, with Michael Bay producing through Platinum Dunes, And that pairing told you exactly what kind of reboot this was going to be. Not a gentle throwback, not a comic book purist's dream, but a modern studio re-engineering of a recognizable brand for the 2010s blockbuster machine. The movie would eventually open on August 8, 2014, after production began in 2013, and it carried a reported budget around $125 million. That matters because Liebesman's job was bigger than directing action scenes. He had to solve a tonal puzzle. The Turtles are ridiculous on paper. 4 mutated sewer-dwelling brothers trained in ninjutsu who love pizza, and yet they are also weirdly mythic, one of those pop culture concepts that survives because every generation reshapes them. The 1990 film leaned grimy and practical. The cartoons leaned playful. The comics could get darker than casual fans remember. Liebesman stepped into that chaos and tried to fuse street-level grime with Bay-style spectacle. You can feel the ambition in the finished film even when it stumbles. He wants the Turtles to look imposing, almost physically overwhelming, while still behaving like brothers first and superheroes second. And that brotherhood is the key to understanding the creative vision. In interviews around release, Liebesman and the producers kept coming back to essentials rather than lore overload. Pizza had to be there, Cowabunga had to be there, April O'Neil had to be there, the Turtles had to be mutants. That sounds basic, but it reveals the entire philosophy of the reboot. Strip the property down to its brand-defining DNA, then rebuild the rest with contemporary scale, motion capture technology, and a more aggressive visual style. In other words, this film wasn't trying to preserve the exact emotional texture of older TMNT versions. It was trying to preserve the iconography while updating the delivery system. That is a very 2010s franchise move. Where Liebesman gets interesting is in how seriously he takes the physicality of the Turtles. These are not cuddly mascots, they're huge. Their shells feel like armor. Their limbs feel engineered for impact, and their faces were designed through a realism filter that divided fans almost immediately. Times reporting on the visual development makes clear that the filmmakers and ILM were pursuing believable anatomy, differentiated movement, and emotional expressiveness through performance capture. Pablo Hellman, the visual effects supervisor, described a long design process built around making each turtle distinct, not just in appearance, but in body language. That's why the film's best moments are not the explosions. They're the small sibling beats, Raphael's anger, Leonardo's stiffness, Michelangelo's chaos, Donatello's overclocked awkwardness. Liebesman understood that if those personalities didn't land, all the digital muscle in the world would mean nothing. Still, this production was born in controversy. Long before audiences saw a frame, the reboot took heat over Michael Bay's public comments suggesting an alien angle for the Turtles, a change that triggered immediate fan backlash. Reports in 2012 even suggested the project had been paused amid the uproar. That context hangs over the film in a fascinating way. You can feel a director and producing team trying to reassure viewers that, yes, this is still TMNT, while also refusing to make something quaint. The eventual film does not go full alien reinvention, but it absolutely keeps the spirit of disruption. The designs are bulked up. The city feels harsher. The action is framed for impact, not whimsy. Liebesman wasn't interested in making the safest possible version. He was trying to make one that could punch its way into multiplex relevance. That's where his strengths and weaknesses become the same thing. Liebesman directs with force. He likes pressure, velocity, bodies crashing through space. Sometimes that energy gives the film real juice, especially when the Turtles are moving together like a single chaotic organism. Sometimes it flattens nuance. But even in the moments where the movie feels overcooked, you can see the intent: make the Turtles feel dangerous again. Make New York feel like a place they crash into rather than simply occupy. Make this reboot loud enough that nobody can accuse it of coasting on childhood affection alone. The result is less elegant than the best franchise revivals of its era, but it is rarely passive. And honestly, passivity would have killed this film faster than any bad review ever could. Commercially, that gamble worked better than many expected. The film opened to more than $65 million domestically and went on to gross about $485 million worldwide, becoming the highest-grossing theatrical TMNT film at the time. Those numbers don't automatically make the movie artistically successful, but they do confirm that Liebesman and the studio identified something real in the marketplace: Audiences were willing to embrace a more industrial, action-heavy take on these characters, even while critics were far less enthusiastic. That split is part of the story too. This wasn't a reboot built to charm everybody. It was built to hit hard, move fast, and sell the Turtles back as blockbuster property. And that sets up the real question beneath the surface. If the director's vision was to make the Turtles bigger, rougher, and more physically imposing, what kind of script could actually support that approach without losing the weird charm that made the franchise endure in the first place? That's where the next layer gets interesting, because the writing process had to balance origin story, franchise reset, fan expectation, and pure popcorn momentum all at once. If the director sets the tone, the screenplay decides whether that tone actually holds together, and Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 2014 had one of the more turbulent writing journeys you'll see in a mainstream reboot. This wasn't a script that emerged fully formed. It was rewritten, reshaped, and course-corrected multiple times, and you can feel that push and pull in the final film. The story credit ultimately goes to Josh Appelbaum, Andre Nemec, and Evan Dougherty, with earlier drafts involving writers like Kevin Eastman, one of the original co-creators of the Turtles. That detail matters. Bringing Eastman into the process signaled an attempt, at least initially, to ground the reboot in its comic book DNA. But this wasn't a clean adaptation. It was a reinvention filtered through studio expectations, franchise-building instincts, and the creative influence of producer Michael Bay. You're not watching a single voice here, you're watching a negotiation. And that negotiation starts at the most fundamental level: origin story. Every reboot has to answer the same question. How do we reintroduce characters everyone already knows without boring the audience? This script takes a hybrid approach. It keeps the essential mythology, Mutagen, Splinter, the brothers, but ties it more directly into April O'Neil's past, making her less of an observer and more of a participant in the Turtles' creation. That's a major deviation from earlier versions. It shrinks the world, pulls everything into a tighter narrative loop. Here's the catch. That choice solves one problem and creates another. On one hand, it gives the story emotional symmetry. April isn't just reporting on the Turtles, she's connected to them, which gives her arc personal stakes. On the other hand, it leans hard into coincidence. The world starts to feel less organic, more constructed. Everything is linked because the script needs it to be, not always because it feels natural. That tension between efficiency and authenticity runs through the entire screenplay. Structurally, the film sticks to a classic three-act blockbuster blueprint, almost aggressively so. Act 1 introduces April, the Foot Clan threat, and teases the existence of the Turtles. Act 2 expands the world, training, backstory, the Shredder setup. Act 3, pure escalation. Rooftops, falling vehicles, high-speed chaos. You've seen this rhythm before, but what's interesting is how quickly the film moves through its beats. There's very little patience here. Scenes don't linger, emotional moments are often cut short to keep momentum alive. That pacing is both a strength and a weakness. On a surface level, it keeps the film entertaining. There's always something happening. But dig a little deeper and you start to notice what's missing: breathing room. Character relationships, especially between the brothers, are sketched in broad strokes rather than deeply explored. The script gives you just enough to understand their dynamic, but rarely enough to feel its full weight. It's like the movie trusts the audience's prior knowledge to fill in the emotional gaps. Dialogue follows a similar pattern. It's functional, occasionally playful, but rarely memorable. The Turtles themselves get the most personality. Michelangelo's humor, Raphael's aggression, Donatello's tech obsession. But even here, the writing leans on archetype rather than nuance. You recognize who they are instantly, which is effective, but you don't always discover anything new about them. The script prioritizes clarity over complexity. Where things get more interesting is in how the screenplay balances tone. This is not a full comedy, not a full action film, and not a full character drama. It's trying to be all three at once. Some scenes lean into humor banter between the brothers, awkward interactions with humans. Others go darker, especially when dealing with Shredder and the Foot Clan. That tonal juggling act is tricky, and the film doesn't always land it cleanly. But when it works, there's a glimpse of what the movie is aiming for: a world where absurdity and danger coexist without canceling each other out. And then there's the biggest behind-the-scenes shadow hanging over the script: the early alien origin concept. Even though the final film steps back from that idea, Traces of that earlier direction still echo in the structure. The emphasis on scientific experimentation, corporate conspiracy, and heightened scale all feel like remnants of a version of the story that was pushing further away from traditional TMNT lore. What we get instead is a compromise, a script that nods to fan expectations while still carrying the DNA of a more radical rewrite. Here's what makes this fascinating from a storytelling perspective. The screenplay isn't just telling a story about mutants and ninjas. It's telling the story of its own development, of ideas added, removed, softened, and reshaped under pressure. You can almost see the layers if you look closely. The emotional core trying to connect, the spectacle trying to dominate, the brand trying to stay recognizable. And yet, despite all that, the script does accomplish one crucial thing. It reintroduces the Turtles to a new generation in a way that feels immediate and accessible. You don't need prior knowledge to follow the story. You don't need deep lore understanding. It's streamlined, sometimes to a fault, but undeniably clear in its intentions. But clarity alone doesn't make a film memorable. The real question becomes, who brings these characters to life in a way the script only hints at? Because on paper, these are still sketches, archetypes waiting for actors to inject personality, rhythm, and emotional truth. And that's where things get really interesting, because the casting choices behind this film weren't just about star power. They were about translating motion capture performances into something audiences could actually connect with. Casting Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 2004 wasn't just about filling roles. It was about solving a very modern filmmaking challenge. How do you build emotional connection with characters that don't physically exist on set in their final form? Because here, the Turtles are motion capture creations, layered with CGI, meaning the actors had to deliver performances that would survive translation through technology. That alone changes the entire casting philosophy. Let's start with the most visible human anchor, Megan Fox as April O'Neil. This was easily the most talked about casting decision, and not always for the right reasons. Fox had previously worked with producer Michael Bay on the Transformers films before a very public falling out, so her return here felt like both a reconciliation and a strategic move. The studio needed a recognizable face to ground a movie filled with digital characters, and Fox brought instant visibility. But here's the interesting part. Her casting also signals a shift in how April O'Neil is written. Earlier versions of the character leaned more into investigative journalism as identity. This version leans into proximity to the central mystery. Fox plays April less as a hardened reporter and more as someone pulled into a story that becomes personal very quickly. It's a different energy. Softer in some moments, reactive in others. Whether that works depends entirely on what you expect from the character, but it undeniably reshapes the narrative center. Opposite her is Will Arnett as Vernon Fenwick, and this is where casting starts to get a little more playful. Arnett brings a very specific comedic rhythm. Dry, self-aware, slightly absurd. And the film uses that to inject humor into scenes that might otherwise feel exposition-heavy. His presence isn't about plot necessity, it's about tonal balance. When the movie risks becoming too serious, Vernon cuts through it with a different kind of energy. Not every joke lands, but the intent is clear. Keep things from tipping too far into grim territory. Then there's William Fichtner as Eric Sachs, a character created specifically for this film rather than pulled directly from classic TMNT lore. Casting Fichtner here is a smart move. He has that ability to feel controlled, almost calm on the surface, while suggesting something more calculating underneath. And that's exactly what this role needs. He isn't a loud villain. He's a quiet one. The kind who feels dangerous because he doesn't need to prove it. But the real complexity lies with the Turtles themselves. 4 actors, Alan Ritchison, Raphael, Pete Plazek, Leonardo, Jeremy Howard, Donatello, and Noel Fisher, Michelangelo, performed the characters physically on set using motion capture. That means they weren't just voice actors. They were embodying these roles, interacting with real environments, building chemistry in real time. Here's where it gets complicated. Their voices were partially replaced in post-production by more recognizable names like Johnny Knoxville and Tony Shalhoub. That decision reveals a lot about studio priorities. Performance capture gave the film physical authenticity, but the studio still wanted vocal familiarity, voices audiences might subconsciously trust or recognize, and that creates a strange dual-layer performance. The body belongs to one actor, the voice, sometimes, to another. When it works, you don't notice the seam. When it doesn't, there's a slight disconnect, like the character exists in two spaces at once. Still, credit where it's due, the physical performances hold the film together more than people often acknowledge. Watch Raphael's movements. Heavy, aggressive, emotionally charged. That's not just animation. That's an actor building a character through motion. Then there's Danny Woodburn as the physical performer for Splinter, with Tony Shalhoub providing the voice. Again, dual performance. Woodburn brings presence and posture, the physicality of a mentor figure, while Shalhoub layers in vocal warmth and wisdom. The combination aims for gravitas, though the effectiveness depends on how well you buy into the film's version of Splinter's backstory. What makes this casting process fascinating is how it reflects the film's identity crisis. Is this a performance-driven story or a spectacle-driven one? The answer is both, but not always comfortably. The actors are clearly working to create distinct personalities, especially among the turtles, but the filmmaking machine around them sometimes prioritizes scale over subtlety. Still, there are moments, small ones, where the casting clicks perfectly. A glance between brothers, a sarcastic remark that feels improvised, a flicker of frustration or loyalty. These are the moments that remind you, beneath all the CGI, there are real performances trying to break through. And that sets up the next layer beautifully, because casting choices only matter if the performances themselves deliver. The question isn't just who was chosen. It's how those actors translated character, emotion, and presence into roles that exist somewhere between human performance and digital creation. That's where we move next, into the heart of the film. The lead performances themselves, where motion capture, voice work, and character psychology collide in ways that either elevate the film or expose its limits. The real test of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 2004 isn't its explosions or its nostalgia. It's whether you believe these four digital characters are actually brothers. Everything hinges on that. Strip away the spectacle, and what you're left with is a story about family, conflict, loyalty. If the performances don't sell that, nothing else matters. Start with Raphael, physically performed by Alan Ritchson. He's the emotional engine of the group, the one carrying anger like it's part of his skeleton. Ritchson doesn't play that anger as surface-level aggression, he builds it into posture. Shoulders tense, movements heavier, more forceful. Every step feels like it lands harder than it needs to. And here's what makes it work. Beneath that aggression, there's vulnerability. Raphael isn't just angry, he's frustrated at not being understood. That duality gives the character weight the script alone doesn't fully provide. Leonardo is a trickier role. Leadership, discipline, responsibility. Those traits can easily become boring if played too straight. Pete Plozek handles the physical performance, while Johnny Knoxville provides the voice. That split creates an interesting dynamic. Plozek's body language is rigid, controlled, almost restrained. Exactly what you'd expect from a leader trying to hold everything together. Knoxville's voice, though, adds a slightly more casual edge. The result? A Leonardo who feels less like an untouchable authority figure and more like someone figuring it out in real time. Imperfect leadership. That's more compelling than perfection. Then there's Michelangelo, brought to life physically and vocally by Noel Fisher. This is where the film loosens up. Michelangelo is chaos pure, unfiltered, occasionally ridiculous chaos. But Fisher doesn't reduce him to comic relief. Watch closely, and you'll see timing at work. He knows exactly when to undercut tension and when to step back. His energy is infectious, but it's controlled chaos. That's a hard balance to strike. Too much, and the character becomes annoying. Too little, and he disappears. Fisher threads that needle surprisingly well. Donatello, performed by Jeremy Howard, leans heavily into physical characterization. This version of Donnie is defined by movement, constantly adjusting gadgets, shifting weight, interacting with technology like it's an extension of his body. It's almost twitchy, restless. The performance communicates intelligence not through dialogue, but through behavior. You don't just hear that he's the smart one. You see it in how he exists within the frame. That's smart acting, especially in a motion capture environment where subtle gestures can easily get lost. And then there's Splinter, physically portrayed by Danny Woodburn and voiced by Tony Shalhoub. This is where performance and mythology collide. Splinter has to function as both mentor and emotional anchor. Woodburn's physicality gives him presence, grounded, deliberate, almost ceremonial in movement. Shalhoub's voice, on the other hand, adds warmth and patience. The combination aims for wisdom, though the script's version of Splinter's backstory doesn't always support the depth the performance is reaching for. Still, in isolated moments, especially quieter ones, the character lands. Now step back and look at the group dynamic. This is where the film either lives or dies. And surprisingly, it lives. Not perfectly, but convincingly enough. The chemistry between the four turtles feels real because it is real. These actors performed together on set. They reacted to each other. They built rhythms that animation alone can't fake. Arguments feel messy. Jokes overlap. Interruptions happen. It's not polished. It's familial. There's a rooftop scene early in their full reveal where this chemistry clicks into place. They argue, they joke, they clash. And for a brief moment, the movie stops being about spectacle and becomes about connection. That's the heartbeat of the film. Not the action, not the plot. That. But here's where the limitations creep in. The film doesn't always trust these performances enough to slow down and let them breathe. Emotional beats are often cut short, replaced by momentum. It's like the movie is afraid that if it pauses too long, audiences might lose interest. Ironically, those are the exact moments that could have elevated the film from entertaining to memorable. On the human side, Megan Fox carries a different kind of burden. She has to act to characters that aren't fully there yet, green-suited performers who will later become massive digital creations. That's not easy. And while her performance isn't the film's strongest element, there are moments where she grounds the chaos, especially when the story leans into her emotional connection with the turtles. It's subtle work in a very loud movie. What's fascinating is how these performances reveal the film's central tension. On one side, you have actors building genuine character relationships. On the other, you have a production constantly pushing towards scale, speed, and spectacle. Sometimes those two forces align. Sometimes they compete. But when they align, when Raphael's anger collides with Leonardo's control, when Michelangelo breaks tension at exactly the right moment, when Donatello's nervous energy fills the gaps, you catch a glimpse of what this movie could have been if it leaned just a little more into its characters. Because at its core, this isn't a story about mutants or ninjas. It's about brothers trying to figure out who they are in a world that doesn't quite accept them. And the performances get you close to that truth. The question is, what kind of world are they actually living in? Because performances exist inside environments, and the next layer of this film reveals just how much effort went into building a version of New York that could hold creatures like these without collapsing under its own weight. Great lead performances can carry a film, but only if the world around them feels worth inhabiting. And in Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 2014, that world is doing a lot of heavy lifting. This isn't just New York City as we know it. It's a heightened, stylized version designed to accommodate 4 giant humanoid turtles sprinting across rooftops without breaking the illusion. The production design, led by Bill Bowes, operates on a very specific principle: grounded exaggeration. Everything feels real, but pushed just far enough to support the film's scale. Streets are dirtier, shadows are deeper, interiors feel slightly more compressed, almost like the city is closing in on itself. This version of New York isn't romanticized, it's functional, a place where something strange could exist just beneath the surface and go unnoticed long enough to become legend. And then there's the lair. This is where the design team really leans into world building. The Turtles' underground home isn't just a hideout, it's a reflection of their personalities. You've got mismatched furniture, improvised technology, scattered relics of human culture they've adopted from a distance. It feels lived in, not designed, lived in. That distinction matters, because the more authentic this space feels, the easier it is to accept the characters who inhabit it. Look closely and you'll see storytelling baked into the details. Donatello's tech clutter bleeding into shared spaces. Michelangelo's playful chaos posters, random objects, visual noise. Raphael's corner feels heavier, less decorated, more contained. Leonardo, cleaner, more structured. These aren't just aesthetic choices. They're character extensions. The set itself is doing narrative work. Costume design takes a similar approach, especially with the turtles themselves. These aren't uniform characters differentiated only by colored masks anymore. Each one is layered with gear straps, armor fragments, accessories that reflect their personality and function. Raphael looks like he's built for combat. Donatello looks like he's built for invention. Michelangelo looks like he dressed himself 5 minutes before running out the door. Leonardo sits somewhere in between, balanced, intentional. That level of differentiation serves two purposes. First, it helps audiences instantly read each character, even in fast-moving action sequences. Second, it reinforces individuality within the group. They're a unit, but they're not identical. In a film where visual clarity matters, especially with CGI-heavy characters, that's a crucial design decision. Now contrast that with the human world above ground. April's apartment, newsrooms, corporate spaces. These environments are cleaner, more recognizable, almost intentionally ordinary, and that contrast is deliberate. The surface world is stable, predictable. The underground world is chaotic, improvised, alive. The film visually separates these spaces to emphasize the divide between normal, society, and the hidden existence of the turtles. But here's where things get interesting. The Foot Clan's design. Their aesthetic leans heavily into anonymity and uniformity. Masks, dark clothing, minimal individuality. They're not meant to stand out. They're meant to feel like a system rather than a group of people. That design choice reinforces their role in the story. They're less about character, more about threat, an extension of power rather than personalities. And then you have Shredder's armor. This is where subtlety disappears completely. The design is aggressive, mechanical, almost overwhelming. Blades extend, surfaces reflect light harshly, the silhouette alone communicates danger. It's less ninja and more walking weapon. And that tells you everything about the film's approach to its villains. It prioritizes intimidation over mystique. Here's the thing about production design in a film like this. It has to do invisible work. If you notice it too much, it risks pulling you out. But if it's not strong enough, the entire illusion collapses. This film walks that line unevenly, but when it works, it really works. The world feels cohesive enough to support the story, even if it occasionally leans too heavily into spectacle. One of the most effective design choices is how the film handles scale. The turtles are larger than previous versions, and the environments are built to emphasize that. Doorways feel tighter, hallways feel narrower, rooftops feel more expansive by comparison. The world adjusts around them, visually reinforcing their physical presence. You don't just see that they're large, you feel it in how they move through space. But there's also a trade-off. In pushing for realism and scale, the film sometimes loses the charm of earlier iterations. The grittier aesthetic creates distance. It makes the world believable, but not always inviting. That's a conscious choice. This isn't trying to be playful in its design, it's trying to be immersive. And when you step back, you start to see the bigger picture. Every design choice, sets, costumes, environments, is working toward the same goal, making the turtles feel like they belong in this world without making the world feel completely fantastical. It's a balancing act between realism and exaggeration, and while it doesn't always land perfectly, the effort is undeniable. Because without this foundation, the performances we talked about earlier wouldn't have anywhere to exist. Characters need space, literal and emotional, and this film builds that space piece by piece. Now the question becomes, how do you capture all of that visually? Because designing a world is one thing, translating it into images, into movement, light, framing. That's an entirely different challenge. And that's where the cinematography steps in, shaping not just what we see, but how we experience it. Cinematography in Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 2014 isn't about elegance, it's about impact. From the very first action beat, you can feel the visual language pushing toward momentum. This is a film that wants to move, and cinematographer Lula Carvalho builds that movement into the DNA of nearly every frame. Carvalho, coming from a background that includes collaborations with directors like Jose Padilla, brings a slightly different texture than you might expect from a Michael Bay-produced blockbuster. There's grit here, a handheld sensibility in certain sequences, a willingness to let the camera feel embedded in the chaos rather than hovering above it. But make no mistake, this is still a large-scale studio film, and that means balancing raw immediacy with polished spectacle. The camera rarely sits still. Even in dialogue scenes, there's a subtle drift, a sense that the frame is alive. That constant motion mirrors the film's pacing, restless, urgent, always pushing forward. When action sequences hit, the camera doesn't just observe, it participates, it swings, tilts, chases. Sometimes it feels like it's barely keeping up with the turtles, which is exactly the point. You're not meant to watch them calmly, you're meant to experience their speed. Lighting plays a huge role in shaping that experience. This is a darker film visually than many expect. Night dominates. Interiors are often dim, lit with practical sources: lamps, streetlights, neon spill. Shadows swallow detail. Faces emerge and disappear within the same shot. That choice adds atmosphere, but it also reinforces the idea that the turtles belong to the margins, to spaces just outside full visibility. And then there's contrast. Bright highlights against deep blacks. Metallic surfaces catching light aggressively, especially in scenes involving Shredder. His presence isn't just narrative, it's visual. Light hits his armor and explodes into sharp reflections, turning him into something almost abstract at times. Not just a character, but a moving shape of danger. One of the most effective visual strategies comes during the action sequences, particularly the snow chase scene. This is where Carvalho's work really clicks. The white environment strips away visual clutter, allowing movement to become the focus. Bodies sliding, flipping, crashing. The camera tracks alongside, sometimes ahead, sometimes behind, creating a sense of unpredictable motion. You're not just watching action, you're inside its rhythm. But here's where the film walks a fine line. The same kinetic energy that makes these sequences exciting can also make them overwhelming. There are moments where clarity gets sacrificed for intensity. Cuts come fast. Angles shift rapidly. It becomes harder to track spatial relationships, who is where, moving in what direction. For some viewers, that chaos enhances the experience. For others, it creates distance. That tension between clarity and chaos defines the cinematography. It's not trying to be precise in a classical sense. It's trying to be immersive. And immersion here means feeling slightly disoriented, slightly off balance, like you've been dropped into the middle of something bigger than you can fully process. Camera technology plays into this as well. The film was shot digitally, allowing for greater flexibility in low-light conditions and heavy visual effects integration. That digital sharpness gives the turtles a tangible presence within the frame. They don't feel pasted in. They occupy space convincingly, interacting with light and shadow in ways that help sell the illusion. Lens choices further emphasize scale. Wide-angle lenses are used to exaggerate the size of the turtles, especially in close proximity to human characters. Faces distort slightly at the edges. Bodies feel larger than life. It's a subtle trick, but it reinforces their physical dominance without needing constant dialogue to remind you. And then there's framing. The film often places the turtles low in the frame, looking up at them, giving them a sense of power. Conversely, human characters are frequently framed more neutrally or even slightly above eye level, making them feel comparatively smaller. These are classic cinematic techniques, but they're used consistently enough here to shape how you perceive hierarchy without consciously noticing it. Still, the cinematography isn't without its drawbacks. The darker palette, while atmospheric, sometimes obscures detail, especially during fast-paced sequences. You catch glimpses rather than full images. That can create mood, but it can also frustrate viewers who want clearer visual information. But when everything aligns, camera movement, lighting, performance, environment, the film finds its visual identity. It becomes less about individual shots and more about sensation. Speed, weight, impact. Because ultimately, this cinematography isn't trying to be beautiful in a traditional sense, it's trying to be visceral. And that brings us to the next layer, the sound, because what you see is only half the experience. The way this film sounds, the music, the effects, the silence, shapes how every punch lands, how every moment resonates, and how this chaotic visual world translates into something you don't just watch, but feel. Sound is where Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 2014 quietly does some of its most important work. And I say quietly, even though this is anything but a quiet film. Because beneath all the explosions and chaos, there's a carefully constructed audio landscape trying to hold everything together. The score comes from Brian Tyler, a composer known for muscular, high-energy soundtracks, and that's exactly what he brings here. Heavy percussion, driving rhythms, brass that hits like a punch rather than a melody. This isn't a score designed to linger in your head after the movie ends. It's designed to push you forward while you're watching it. Listen closely during action sequences. The music doesn't just accompany movement, it amplifies it. Beats align with impacts. Tempo rises with tension. It's almost mechanical in its precision. You feel the escalation before you consciously register it. That's Tyler's strength. He builds momentum through sound, but the more interesting moments come when the score pulls back, when it allows space. There are brief scenes, usually between the turtles themselves, where the music softens, becomes more restrained. Simpler instrumentation, fewer layers, and suddenly the emotional core has room to breathe. These moments don't last long, but they matter. They hint at a different version of the film, one more focused on character than spectacle. Now layer in the sound design, and things get even more textured. This is where the film earns its physicality. Every movement has weight. Every step, every landing, every collision is engineered to feel heavy. The turtles don't just move, they impact the world around them. You hear it in the low-end frequencies. Deep, resonant hits that make their presence undeniable. Raphael, for example, sounds different from Michelangelo. Subtle, but intentional. Raphael's movements carry more bass, more force. Michelangelo's are lighter, quicker. These aren't random choices. They reinforce personality through sound. You're not just seeing differences, you're hearing them. And then there's Shredder. His sound design is almost weaponized. Metallic movements layered with sharp, slicing effects. Every motion carries a threat. Even when he's standing still, there's a sense of tension in the audio space around him. It's not just what he does, it's how he sounds doing it. That's what makes him feel dangerous before he even acts. One of the most effective tools the film uses, though not often enough, is silence, or near silence. Moments where the audio drops just enough to create contrast. Because when everything is loud all the time, nothing stands out. But when the film pulls back, even briefly, it resets your senses. The next impact hits harder. The next explosion feels bigger. There's a rooftop sequence where this balance almost clicks perfectly. Wind, distant city noise, minimal score. You can hear space, you can feel height, and for a moment the film breathes. Then the action kicks back in, and the full audio machinery returns. That contrast, that push and pull, is where the sound design is at its strongest. Dialogue, on the other hand, has a tougher job, especially for the turtles. Their voices have to cut through layers of effects, music, and environmental noise while still feeling natural. Most of the time, the mix handles this well. You can understand them. Their personalities come through. But occasionally, the density of the soundscape competes with clarity. It's a balancing act, and not every scene lands perfectly. What's fascinating is how the audio reinforces the film's central identity. This is not a subtle movie. It's not trying to whisper its way into your mind. It's trying to hit you, visually, physically, sonically. The sound design mirrors the cinematography we talked about earlier. Both are built around impact. But here's the deeper layer. Beneath all that noise, there's an attempt to create emotional resonance. Small musical cues, slight shifts in tone, moments where the sound pulls back just enough to let character peek through. They're easy to miss if you're only focused on the spectacle, but they're there. And when you combine everything, the score, the effects, the mixing, you get a film that doesn't just show you action, it surrounds you with it. Every punch, every crash, every movement is reinforced from multiple directions. Sight and sound working together to create something immersive, even when it borders on overwhelming. Because that's the tightrope this film walks. Immersion versus overload. Energy versus exhaustion. And that tension doesn't just exist on screen, it existed behind the scenes as well. Because making a film this technically complex, with motion capture, heavy CGI, large-scale action sequences, and constant rewrites, is never a smooth process. In fact, the production journey of this movie is almost as chaotic as the film itself. The making of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 2014 wasn't smooth, controlled, or quietly efficient. It was messy. Publicly messy. And that chaos behind the scenes? You can feel traces of it in the final film if you know where to look. Production officially kicked off in 2013, with principal photography taking place across New York City and other locations. On paper, everything looked like a standard blockbuster pipeline: big budget, heavy VFX planning, motion capture integration, second unit action teams. But this project carried baggage long before cameras started rolling. The biggest storm hit early before a single frame was shot. The now infamous alien origin concept, floated during development, triggered immediate backlash from fans. It wasn't just criticism, it was outrage. This is one of those rare cases where audience reaction actively influenced the direction of a film before production fully locked in. The studio paused, reworked, adjusted. That kind of course correction doesn't just tweak a script, it ripples through everything: design, tone, character backstories. And here's where it gets fascinating. When a film pivots that late in development, it doesn't erase what came before, it layers over it. You end up with a movie that carries DNA from multiple versions of itself. That's exactly what happened here. The final product isn't one clean vision, it's a negotiated outcome between competing ideas. On set, the technical challenges were just as demanding. Motion capture meant the actors playing the turtles weren't hidden away in studios. They were physically present, performing alongside human actors in full gear. That creates a strange hybrid environment. You got performers in tracking suits interacting with practical sets, while everyone involved has to imagine the final digital layer that doesn't exist yet. Think about that for a second. Actors reacting emotionally to characters who will only fully exist months later in post-production. That requires trust between actors, director, and VFX teams, and it requires precision. Every movement has to be captured correctly. Every interaction has to align with something invisible. Then you add action choreography into the mix. Fight sequences weren't just about stunt work. They had to translate into exaggerated, superhuman movement once the CGI layer was applied. That means choreography had to be designed twice, once for the physical performance and once for the digital enhancement. It's like building a scene in two realities at the same time. Weather and location shooting brought their own complications. New York is not an easy city to control. Traffic, crowds, unpredictable conditions. It all adds friction to production. Large-scale sequences, especially those involving destruction or high-speed movement, require coordination across multiple departments. One delay cascades into others. Time becomes pressure, and pressure leads to adjustments. Reshoots are part of almost every blockbuster, but here they carried extra weight. When you're dealing with heavy CGI, reshooting a scene isn't just about refilming actors. It means reworking entire digital sequences. That's expensive, time-consuming, but sometimes necessary when the film's tone or clarity isn't landing the way the studio expects. Here's where the human side of production starts to show. Big films like this are often described in terms of scale budget, effects, spectacle. But behind that scale are hundreds of people solving problems in real time, coordinating departments, fixing issues, adapting to changes. The smoother a film feels, the more invisible that work becomes. In this case, you can sense the effort, the constant recalibration. And yet, despite all of that, the film made it to completion with a cohesive enough identity to function. That's not a small achievement. With this many moving parts, this many creative voices, and this much external pressure, it could have easily collapsed into something unwatchable. Instead, it lands somewhere in between. You see the ambition, you see the compromises, you see the seams if you look closely, but you also see the craft holding it together. There's a kind of accidental honesty in that. The film doesn't feel effortless because there wasn't. It feels constructed, negotiated, engineered under pressure, and that gives it a different kind of texture compared to more streamlined productions. But all of that effort, every rewrite, every reshoot, every technical challenge, ultimately leads to one unavoidable question: did it pay off? Because at the end of the day, no matter how complicated the journey is, the industry measures success in numbers: opening weekends, worldwide gross, profit margins, market impact. And this film's financial story? That's where things take another interesting turn, because commercially, it performed far better than many expected, even while critics were tearing it apart. The most surprising thing about Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 2014 isn't how it looks or how it sounds, it's how it performed. Because if you were tracking the film leading up to release, the expectation wasn't dominance, it was uncertainty, mixed buzz, fan skepticism, critical doubt even before opening weekend. And then it hit theaters and immediately rewrote that narrative. Opening on August 8, 2014, the film pulled in over $65 million domestically in its first weekend. That's not just solid, that's a statement. It knocked Guardians of the Galaxy out of the top spot, a film that had been riding a wave of critical and audience goodwill. Think about that contrast for a second. One film embraced for its charm and originality, the other questioned for its design choices and tone. And yet, at the box office, the Turtles won that weekend. That opening tells you everything about the power of brand recognition. These characters had been part of pop culture for decades, Comics, cartoons, toys, earlier films. The reboot didn't need to convince audiences to care about the Turtles. It needed to convince them to show up. And it did. By the end of its run, the film grossed roughly $485 million worldwide against a budget of around $125 million. That's a strong return by any blockbuster standard. Not record-breaking, but comfortably profitable. And in the business of franchise filmmaking, profitability isn't just success, it's validation. It tells the studio, this version works. Maybe not perfectly, but enough to continue. Here's where the numbers get more interesting. The domestic performance was solid, but the international market played a huge role in pushing the film toward that global total. That reflects a broader trend in 2010s. Hollywood franchises becoming increasingly dependent on overseas audiences. Action translates, spectacle travels, and this film leans heavily into both. But box office numbers don't exist in isolation. They interact with expectations. And going into release, expectations were complicated. The fan backlash during development, the divisive character designs, the tonal uncertainty, none of that suggested a guaranteed hit. If anything, it suggested risk, which makes the financial outcome feel like a kind of paradox. The film succeeds commercially despite its controversies, not because of them. Or maybe, this is where it gets tricky, partly because of them. Controversy creates visibility. Visibility creates curiosity. Curiosity sells tickets. And then there's the timing. August releases often sit in a strange position, post-summer peak, but still within blockbuster season. The film didn't have to compete with the heaviest hitters of June and July, but it still benefited from audiences in full summer movie mode. That strategic positioning matters more than it might seem. Now, let's talk legs. How the film performed after opening weekend. The drop-off was noticeable, which isn't unusual for effects. Heavy films with front-loaded audiences. Big opening, then tapering interest. That suggests something important. Initial curiosity was high, but sustained enthusiasm was more limited. People showed up, but not always twice. And yet, from a studio perspective, that doesn't change the headline. The film made money. Significant money. Enough to greenlight a sequel, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, Out of the Shadows in 2016. That's the ultimate metric in franchise filmmaking. Not critical praise, not fan approval. Continuation. But here's the deeper layer. The one numbers alone can't capture. Financial success doesn't automatically translate to cultural impact. Some films dominate the box office and then fade quickly from conversation. Others underperform financially but grow in influence over time. So where does this one land? It lands in an interesting middle space. Recognizable, profitable, but not universally embraced. A film that people saw, talked about, debated, but didn't necessarily rally around in the way some franchises achieve. And that tension becomes even clearer when you look at how critics and audiences actually responded. Because while the box office told one story, success, viability, continuation, the critical reception told a very different one. That split? That's where things get really revealing. Because when critics and audiences don't fully agree, you start to see what a film is versus what it was meant to be. And in this case, that divide becomes one of the most important parts of the film's legacy. Critics didn't just dislike Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, 2004. They were divided in a way that reveals exactly what the film was struggling to be. On Rotten Tomatoes, the film landed with a critic score hovering around the low 20% range, while audience scores were significantly higher. Metacritic told a similar story, with generally unfavorable critic reviews. That gap? That's the entire conversation. Because critics and audiences weren't watching the same movie, or at least not valuing the same things, critics focused on structure, tone, and originality. And from that lens, the film felt familiar to a fault. The narrative leaned heavily on blockbuster formulas. The pacing often rushed past emotional development, and the tonal balance, somewhere between gritty reboot and playful nostalgia, didn't always hold. Reviews frequently pointed out that the film felt assembled rather than organically built, pieces working individually but not always locking together. But audiences? They responded to something else entirely. They responded to the Turtles themselves. That's the key difference. Critics evaluated the film as a cinematic work. Audiences evaluated it as an experience. And when the turtles were on screen bantering, fighting, interacting, that experience worked often enough to carry the film through its weaker elements. You see it in the patterns of praise. Even negative reviews often admitted that the turtles had personality, that their dynamic, their energy, their presence brought life to the film. The problem wasn't the core characters, it was everything surrounding them. And here's where the divide becomes more nuanced. Critics weren't wrong. The film does struggle with narrative cohesion. It does rely heavily on spectacle. It does prioritize momentum over depth. But audiences weren't wrong either. There's enjoyment here. Genuine, uncomplicated enjoyment. This is one of those films where intention and execution don't fully align, but impact still lands. The design choices, for example, became a major point of contention. The more realistic, bulked-up look of the turtles divided fans and critics alike. Some saw them as intimidating and modernized. Others saw them as over-designed, losing the simplicity that made earlier versions iconic. That debate didn't disappear after release. It became part of the film's identity. And then there's the tone. Critics wanted clarity, either lean into fun or lean into grit. The film tries to do both. Sometimes it works, sometimes it clashes. That inconsistency became one of the most common criticisms. But again, audiences were more forgiving, because when the humor landed, it landed. When the action delivered, it delivered. This is where cultural context matters. By 2014, audiences were deep into the era of franchise filmmaking. Spectacle-driven, effects-heavy, fast-paced storytelling had become the norm. This film fits squarely into that landscape. It doesn't challenge it, it participates in it. And participation was enough. There were no major awards, no critical reevaluation that suddenly reframed the film as misunderstood genius. But there was conversation, debate, reaction. The film stayed in the cultural bloodstream longer than many critically panned blockbusters do. Part of that comes from the brand itself. The turtles aren't just characters, they're generational icons. Every new version gets compared, not just to previous films, but to childhood memories. That creates a unique kind of reception. You're not just judging a movie, you're judging what it represents. And that's why reactions were so strong on both sides. For some, this film felt like a betrayal of tone and design. For others, it felt like a modern update that finally gave the turtles blockbuster scale again. Neither perspective is entirely wrong. They're just prioritizing different aspects of what TMNT should be. Over time, the film has settled into a kind of middle ground reputation. Not hated enough to be dismissed completely. Not loved enough to be celebrated, but consistently remembered. And in franchise filmmaking, being remembered matters, because memory leads to continuation, to sequels, to reboots, to reinterpretations. And that brings us to the final layer, the one that looks beyond numbers, beyond reviews, beyond immediate reactions. What does this film actually mean in the larger context of the franchise? What themes does it carry, intentionally or not? And what kind of legacy does it leave behind? Because sometimes a film's true value isn't in how perfectly it executes, but in what it reveals about the era that created it. What Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 2014 ultimately reveals isn't just a story about four brothers. It reveals how Hollywood redefines nostalgia in the blockbuster era. Strip away the action, the CGI, the noise, and you're left with something more telling. A film caught between honoring what came before and reshaping it for a new generation that consumes spectacle differently. At its core, the film is about identity, not in a quiet, introspective way, but in a loud, externalized struggle. These characters don't just exist outside society. They're hidden from it, rejected by it before they even have a chance to belong. That idea runs deeper than the film sometimes allows itself to explore. The turtles aren't just mutants. They're outsiders trying to define themselves without a place in the world. Brotherhood becomes their anchor because it's the only structure they fully trust. Raphael's anger, Leonardo's need for control, Michelangelo's humor, Donatello's intellect. These aren't just personality traits, they're coping mechanisms. Different responses to the same problem. Who are we if the world doesn't accept us? The film brushes against that question repeatedly, even if it rarely pauses long enough to fully unpack it. Then there's the theme of visibility versus invisibility. The turtles operate in the shadows, saving a city that doesn't know they exist. There's something almost mythic about that, heroes without recognition. but there's also something lonely in it. They're protecting a world that would likely fear them if it saw them clearly. That tension between wanting to be seen and needing to stay hidden sits quietly beneath the surface. And here's where the film becomes more reflective of its time than it might intend. The 2010s blockbuster landscape was obsessed with scale. Bigger worlds, bigger characters, bigger stakes. This film follows that blueprint almost perfectly. It enlarges everything. The turtles themselves, the action, the threat. But in doing so, it also reveals the trade-off of that era. As scale increases, intimacy often decreases. Compare this to earlier versions of the Turtles, and the shift becomes obvious. The 1990 film, with its practical suits and grounded tone, felt closer, more tactile. This version feels expansive but more distant. Not worse, just different. It reflects a filmmaking philosophy where immersion is achieved through magnitude rather than closeness. That's the legacy of this film. Not as a definitive TMNT story, but as a snapshot of how franchises were being re-engineered at the time. Recognizable IP, updated with modern effects, accelerated pacing, and a focus on global appeal. It's part of a larger pattern, not an isolated case. And yet, despite all of that industrial machinery, something human still manages to break through. Those small moments between the brothers, the flashes of humor, the hints of vulnerability, they're easy to overlook, but they're the reason the film doesn't collapse under its own weight. Because here's the truth. This movie isn't trying to be the best version of the Turtles. It's trying to be the most viable version for its moment in time. And in that sense, it succeeds. But success doesn't mean perfection. The film struggles with tone. It rushes past emotional depth. It leans too heavily on spectacle when it could trust its characters more. These aren't small issues. They're structural ones, and they prevent the film from reaching the level of impact it occasionally hints at. Still, there's something undeniably watchable here, not because it's flawless, but because it's energetic, committed, willing to take risks even when those risks don't fully pay off. So where does that leave it? Not as a classic, not as a failure, as a transitional film. A bridge between what the Turtles were and what modern blockbusters expected them to become. A film that carries both nostalgia and reinvention, sometimes in harmony, sometimes in conflict. And maybe that's the most honest way to look at it. Because not every film defines a franchise. Some films redefine the direction it's heading. And this one? It pushed the Turtles firmly into the era of large-scale, effects-driven storytelling, whether audiences were fully ready for that shift or not. The result is a film that may not stay with you emotionally the way the best entries do, but one that undeniably leaves its mark on the franchise's evolution. And sometimes, that's enough. There's a moment easy to miss when all four turtles stand together, not fighting, not joking, just existing in the same space. No explosions, no urgency, just presence. And in that moment, you see the version of this film that could have been something more lasting, something deeper, because everything that matters is already there. That's the paradox of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 2014. It has the characters, it has the world, it has the scale. But it doesn't always trust itself to slow down long enough to let those elements fully connect. At its best, the film taps into something timeless. Family, not the polished, idealized version. The messy one. The argumentative one. The kind where love shows up through conflict as much as it does through support. That dynamic between the brothers? That's the soul of TMNT. And whenever the film leans into it, even briefly, it works. But here's the frustration. It only leans in halfway. The film is constantly pulled in two directions. One side wants character, the other wants spectacle. And spectacle wins more often than it should. Not because it's better, but because it's louder, faster, easier to sell. Faster, easier to sell. That doesn't make the film empty. It makes it conflicted. And that conflict defines its legacy. This isn't a movie that people revisit because it changed how they think about storytelling. It's a movie they revisit because it delivers a certain kind of energy, a specific flavor of blockbuster filmmaking that dominated its era. Big, aggressive, unapologetically engineered for mass appeal. But energy fades. What lasts is connection. And this film only almost gets there. That almost is important because it means the foundation is real. The performances gave it life. The design gave it presence. The world building gave it structure. It's not hollow, it's just incomplete. Think about how different this film feels compared to something like Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. That earlier version had limitations, budget, technology, but it compensated with intimacy. You felt closer to those characters. Here, you feel the scale more than the closeness. Neither approach is inherently better, but they create very different experiences. This film chose scale, and it committed to that choice fully. That commitment is why it succeeded commercially. It understood what the modern blockbuster audience expected and delivered it without hesitation. The pacing, the visuals, the sound, the action, it's all calibrated for maximum immediacy. But immediacy has a cost. It sacrifices reflection. Moments that could have lingered are rushed. Emotional beats that could have landed are abbreviated. The film keeps moving because it's afraid that stopping might break momentum. Ironically, stopping might have made it stronger. Because beneath all the noise, there's a story worth hearing. A story about identity, about belonging, about family defining itself in a world that doesn't understand it. That story is there. You just have to look past the spectacle to see it. So what's the final verdict? This is not the definitive Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles film. It's not the one that defines the characters for all time, but it is the one that reintroduced them to a new generation on the biggest possible stage. And that matters, because franchises don't survive on perfection. They survive on reinvention. Some entries preserve, some evolve, some experiment. This one recalibrates. It takes familiar elements and reshapes them for a different era. An era of digital spectacle, global audiences, and franchise-first thinking. It doesn't always succeed artistically, but it succeeds strategically. And sometimes, in Hollywood, strategy is what determines survival. The real legacy of this film isn't in its critical scores or even its box office totals. It's in what came after. Sequels, reboots, animated reinterpretations. The Turtles didn't disappear again. They stayed in circulation, they adapted, they evolved. This film helped make that possible. So no, it's not perfect, but it's not forgettable either. It's a turning point, a loud, messy, imperfect step forward that kept the franchise alive in a changing cinematic landscape. And maybe that's the most honest way to judge it. Not by what it could have been, but by what it allowed the Turtles to become next.